Let me tell you about Delete Yourself.
In the wake of German politics, especially within the youth, taking a dip back into troubling waters post-unification, a fire of anger ignited within Alec Empire, Haneen Elias, and Carl Crack, a range aimed at their leaders and parts of the music scene they were passionate about. They saw Nazism back on the rise and in response formed Atari Teenage Riot, which is like one of the best band names, by the way, with a core idea of dismantling this growing reformation of hate by using waves upon waves of noise while embracing a love of diversity and sonic fusions throughout. Through the channels of essentially siphoning money out of the machine via screwing over European label Fantagram because they were aiming to soften their hard political edge anyway, and they essentially said fuck that, the group launched their own independent label to actually release a few warm-up EPs and eventually the group's debut that is the subject of today's video. It's an album so intensely forward with its ideas that acts as an incredible mission statement that recently turned 30. It's the most of the time and yet forward-thinking album of its kind, and whose core messages should really stay in the minds of the new youth, in my opinion. It's the Sonic Assault blending of hardcore and electronic ideas that is Delete Yourself.
I feel like the worlds of, ironically enough, both punk and like electronic dance music were at a crossroads in the mid-90s. So for a group like Atari Teenage Riot to sort of come out amidst that, it just kind of feels like serendipity, to be honest. Admittedly, while nothing post this I feel like really sounded exactly like Delete Yourself, that kind of makes this debut all the more special. You know, there was still a progression of punk past the rise of pop punk in the mid-90s that kept its more edgier tendencies. And groups like The Prodigy on records like Fat of the Land definitely kept getting beefier and amped higher in a way that sort of feels like a more polished, less politically leaning version of what a record like this is doing.
I meant to say this in all of the takes I made talking about this, but the one album that does come the closest to like evoking this sound is another album I've talked about in this classic segment, Nail Bombs, Point Blank. But again, doesn't wholly sound like this. It's just the closest that melds some electronics with those aggressive tendencies in a production style that kind of matches it.
Atari Teenage Riot doesn't even sound like Nine Inch Nails, man. Like, they're just very much a digital hardcore band. Something that I do love in certain scenes. Like, I love what bands sort of do in the electro-industrial scene that sound a bit more like this, like your Scooters from the Mortal Kombat soundtrack, specifically, or even like your Cam FDMs if we're going like bands that I actually have spent time listening into. But, again, I absolutely love this album. It is, ironically enough, the only album from Atari Teenage Riot that I have heard, but Delete Yourself has been, like, a classic in my eyes for ages. The way that they fuse, like, hardcore, especially guitar-forward hardcore, and break beats and the like is just a really lovely cocktail on here. It's amazing I haven't checked out any of the rest of the discography, but I have heard that, like, nothing is as good as what this has going on. You know, the lead guitars on tracks like Into the Death and the big single from this Speed are, sound like Slayer cuts with, like, a techno beat under them, and I love that about it. Again, that sort of all-in-the-face feeling that Start the Riot has is the energy of this, and I love how they also find ways to, like, fuse these samples in there to sort of, like, even branch out into other, you know, sonic realms. You know, the opening sample that starts this off on Start the Riot before it gets flipped into, like, a breakcore style beat is, like, a common popular hip-hop sample, and I love how that just kicks out the gate of, we are going to be, like, a sort of interesting blend here. We're going to be a cool little cocktail of sound. They go hard against drug excess in the dance scene and sort of seeing that as like a numbing from the darker things going on. And I love their sort of combative nature towards that on tracks like Raver Bashing. And even how they kind of talk about sort of leaning into the comfort even at the sacrifice of Nazism and hatred really getting on the rise and at the forefront of minds on tracks like Speed and Mini Junkies. Again, I love how upfront they are on being very anti-Nazi. Like the live truck cuts that are on here, Hesjag with Nazis and Kids Are United. I like that on top of that, outside of being very just passionate about advocating for better in your culture, in your world, they do just indulge in their passions for what they make. You know, they do have this great balance of guitar and electronics that creates this dynamic, still abrasive, consistently experience. But a moment like Sex, where the group really strips away a lot of that intensity to let Hanin sort of have this spoken word dialogue with the listener, talking about why they love doing this to begin with, you know, the inclusion they felt coming into this scene. And I think that that being this like sort of centerpiece helps resonate that amidst all of this aggression and confrontation, it is all wrought from a place of just craving that unity, craving that lack of hatred, that lack of exclusion that they had seen back on the rise and were just very much against. They have ways of trying to get a little bit accessible because, you know, the whole story of them trying to make this a commercially viable product wrought some songs that were sort of popular in the run since Speed had some longevity post this album's release. But I think that the title track and Kids Are United and even the band's title track are catchy enough jams that have a hook outside of the like repetitive electronic inspired loops almost that are the hooks of some of the earlier tracks on the album, like End of the Death and Start the Riot. You know, I think that there's a nice balance of that side of like songwriting as well that I think is really admirable on here. You know, it is very message forward and still goes hard on its inspirations in the realms of electronic music, but when they try to like take that punk side and still write like more melodic songs, I like that they do both well. And admittedly, while I don't think this album is super huge as far as like its broad notoriety, I feel like it's one of those albums that if you know, you know, if you like hardcore music or if you like digital hardcore music especially, this is one of those like up there records. At least I feel like it has to be, because like the sounds on here are just so good. They're so raw, but they're so well done in my opinion. Like it's all to service this very rootsy for the people style, you know, and I love what they got going on here. And I feel like if you haven't heard this album and you do like intense electronic music, especially, or if you even if you like punk music and you want something to maybe bridge the worlds of punk and electronic music for you, give this a spin. Let me know what you think. And genuinely, if you've listened to this album after this video, just let me know what you think of it. If you like this look back, though, on what I would deem a hardcore classic of its era, especially, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week, depending on what I've got going on. I do have another Pajama Jam going live on Saturday, so I hope you're excited for that. I'm going to go, though. I've been Valrack. Thank you again so very much for watching this. You guys are good idiots, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.